I want to bring you back to kind of the issues of mental health in our families. So many people here and talking about it as a family. So many people struggle with kids who have addiction, who have issues that parents aren't really adept at understanding. You go to a teacher and you say, my kid seems a little depressed. They say, that's normal childhood. That's a teenager. Don't worry about it. A kid goes off to college, doesn't call you back. You think, that's kind of normal, and then they develop all kinds of emotional and mental health issues, and then you spend a lifetime and a fortune trying to figure out what's the right medication, what's the right diagnosis, how do you support it, do you draw boundaries, do you let them in, do you let them out, how do you talk about it as a family? What is, give us a tool, give us a tip, give these parents and people an idea of how to handle this in our families.
Well, first, the reason I came at it from the political and policy angle is that this is uncomfortable for everyone to talk about, but if you put it in the context of how we treat other chronic illnesses where there's family education, if you have diabetes, the healthcare system reimburses for the test strips, for the medication, for the wraparound services, because it's really seen as something where we want to treat this. We know it's a chronic. We don't want you to get off, too much on the sugar. It's going to affect. And yet with the mental illness and addiction, we wait until you're having to have your legs amputated or you go blind, basically, before the medical system kicks in to pay for any kind of care. My point is that I don't think, Maria, we're ever going to get our culture to change fast enough. And I know there are a number of attorneys here who have litigated this parity law very effectively. There has to be liability here to get the system to change. Now, the Civil Rights Act didn't change people's attitudes in many respects towards minorities in this country, but it made it illegal for them to overtly discriminate against them. And so what I think is we need to make sure we enforce the law as the mechanism so that people can say, did you get your checkup from the neck up? Make it normal, like in the healthcare system. What do you mean your insurance carrier isn't reimbursing for a screening of depression and anxiety and addiction? I mean, that should be essential as part of our healthcare assessment as to where you are and where you need to be. And that's easier for people to talk about, Maria, about, well, did the healthcare system reimburse it? And they should, and it's the law. As opposed to, do you feel comfortable talking about it? Because if we fight this fight just on a cultural level, it's going to take a long time, I think.
But it has to start.
I don't want to be too downer on it.
Well, but I think it starts, you talk a lot in the book about being misunderstood, about feeling alone, about your brother who had cancer and everybody stepped forward to try to help him because he had cancer. But you who were suffering from depression, loneliness, addiction, no one stepped forward to help you. No one knew how. That's what I want to get at. If you, knowing what you know now, go back to your 14-year-old self, go back to your 12-year-old self. What could your parents have done that they didn't do? What did you want them to do? What did you want me as a cousin to do?
So, but going back to my point about
stick with my point. You're an architect of change, but I'm the interviewer and I'm the older cousin, so do what I say.
The legal and political architecture of change is personal. My asthma doctor, Dr. Scanlon, would have part of his healthcare system in his EMR, electronic medical record, would have said, okay, let's take a family history because we need to treat Patrick. And like they do with cancer, so they can screen me for cancer because Teddy had it, my mom had it, my dad had it, my sister had it. They screen. Or high blood pressure or cardiovascular disease. They screen for it. But if you screen for mental illness in your family, or you screen for other biomarkers like the adverse childhood experience, which was a Kaiser-funded longitudinal research project that identified that if you come from a family where there's violence, or whether one or more of your parents suffered from a mental illness or addiction, or you heard gunshots, or you lived in abject poverty, there is a correlation between those indices, and if you add up and there's 3 or more of those indices, then the correlation is even stronger. Just on a scientific basis, Maria, insurance companies are going to pay for that because they know, oh my God, on a biomarker test, Patrick shows enormous risk, for ending up in trouble if he's not closely managed, particularly during the vulnerable years of his adolescence. And then, so that's